And cheese.
This is actually person. This is all of everyone in St. Croix.
Hey, when should I recite that?
You know, in a little bit, whenever.
Go ahead, anytime you want to start.
All right. Hello and welcome to our podcast called Saving the Children of St. Croix. My name is Dr. Paul Law. I'm a Johns Hopkins trained pediatrician and scientist based in one of the poorest places on earth, St. Croix province in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Because of extreme poverty there, thousands of children die every year. In fact, close to 1 in 5 don't make it to their 5th birthday. A mortality rate that's around 20 times more than in the United States. Moyole ase DPS lekolo sawala la ne la wanjo mochwa ukindiko Prix Nobel tayo sawala wiwa wa malaria ndiko wanjiwa Institut à Recherche lindo la Johns Hopkins asundayo sawala su la kamo wa malaria yima nangato shaye maya moyo.
Moyole Antouche Luke Sankaru.
Okay. All right. So in this podcast, I'll be talking to Nobel laureate Peter Agre about what can be done to save children in Africa and the St. Croix. And as we learn, medical decisions in remote Africa also affect the rest of the world. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Agre, who I've known for many years. He received the 2003 Nobel Prize in Chemistry with Roderick McKinnon of the Rockefeller Institute at Rockefeller University for the discovery of aquaporins, water channels that facilitate the movement of water across cell membranes. Dr. Agre's research is focused on molecular aspects of human diseases, including hemolytic anemias, blood group antigens, and malaria. He is director of the, he just recently stepped down as director of the Johns Hopkins Malaria Research Institute. And he's worked in many, many different countries and has received honorary doctorates from many countries, maybe more countries than I've visited. And so before we begin, here's a little background on the St. Croix. I volunteer as the chief of medical research and the only pediatrician in St. Croix, which is about the size of Ohio and has 3 million residents, half of whom are under 18 years of age. St. Croix is profoundly underdeveloped. It has no paved roads or paved airports. Most villages can be reached only by foot or using tiny motorcycles. They need to be tiny so you can lift them over the trees. Yeah, so heavy motorcycles don't work very well. And there's no municipal water or electrical systems. There are a few small hospitals which don't have electricity, at least not 24 hours a day. And in the St. Croix, the biggest health problem is malaria. About 90% of hospitalizations for children are related to malaria. And that's why we're so fortunate to have this opportunity to talk to Dr. Agre. So, Dr. Agre, can you tell us what malaria is in a nutshell?
Malaria is a scourge which has been with humans since the dawn of time. It was probably a chimpanzee or gorilla parasite that's cross species. And there are several forms of malaria. The most severe is the falciparum, which is the killer malaria of Africa. It has killed about 1 million people a year, mostly small children in sub-Saharan Africa. Although since the millennium, of the past 20 years, improved medicines and public health efforts have improved. So we're down to about 600,000 deaths, still way too many. It would cause more than 200 million cases of malaria. And so eliminating it is not only a challenge of biological importance, it's a huge challenge to the populations. These are the poorest people on the earth. And when a child is afflicted with malaria, it stops everything.
You said how many cases per year in the world?
more than 200 million.
Okay, so we have 3 million people in the St. Croix, and we have about 900,000 cases that go documented,
So that's documented.
which is
Order.
missing. So it's
So-
probably over 1 million.
Yeah,
Some people probably get it twice in the year, but that's about more than a third of people have a case of malaria in St. Croix per year. So we contribute to that number quite a bit. Why did you decided to go into malaria research after winning the Nobel? Why was that?
well, I grew up in Minnesota, and in our Norwegian Lutheran church, there were a group of people who went to places like Africa and Asia and in remote rural settings to become medical missionaries. And these were prominent people. Our governor's sister was a nurse who married a surgeon, and they went to Cameroon for 35 years. And I'm not practicing member of any church. I felt this was something I would like to pursue. So I came to Johns Hopkins as a medical student rather than staying at home in Minnesota and going to the University of Minnesota, in part because Hopkins had such a strong program in tropical diseases, they called them then, basically global health of the developing world. And as a student here, I worked on cholera, a horrible diarrheal disease. And after my clinical training, I started working on red blood cells, in part because my best friend and roommate in medical school, Van Bennett, was advanced rapidly. He went right from medical school to a faculty position and was working on red cells. And of course, the most serious disease of red cells is malaria. So it's something I wanted to pursue further. And yet we discovered a protein which we call aquaporin-1, the water channel protein of membranes, that distracted us from working on tropical diseases. And it was after I achieved full professor and had a sizable group, we started working on malaria because of an opportunity here at Johns Hopkins with a magnificent gift from Michael Bloomberg and the Bloomberg Philanthropies to start the Johns Hopkins Malaria Research Institute. They asked me to become the director. I didn't feel scientifically qualified, but I felt that the emphasis of the Nobel Prize, it could bring resources to the Institute and participate in it. So it was a long-standing dream that I finally pursued.
It's awesome. That's great. Okay. So as a pediatrician, I focus mostly on the kids of the St. Croix. And I was wondering if you could tell us how, what ways the malaria parasite causes illness, or what are the types of illnesses that it causes, especially for children.
Yes. When a child gets infected with malaria from the Anopheles mosquitoes, which carry the parasite, the first time a child's infected, it's a life or death illness, severe toxic fevers. The parasite invades red cells and will rapidly divide to 32 daughter cells, and they'll infect 32 cells, and there's a logarithmic expansion within about a week. We have hundreds of billions of parasites in the peripheral blood of the individual, and these cause toxic fevers, brain damage from cerebral malaria, renal damage, lung damage, and sadly, many of these children will succumb to the infection. They'll die, but those that survive are oftentimes left with scars for life, cortical blindness, renal insufficiency, which would be a challenge in any setting, but in the developing world is basically a death sentence.
So at the Loja Hospital, where I work in the St. Croix, most of the kids either have, well, we stick to cerebral malaria, kids with very severe anemia from malaria, or both. Those are the three that, perhaps it's just the three that we can detect. But That's how they usually get classified in our admissions, but so what about, so some kids, so maybe we go out to some random village in the St. Croix and test, 4 and 5-year-olds, 3, 4, 5-year-olds for malaria. They are most of them are actually infected with the parasite all the time. And what are the long-term consequences of having that sort of that long-term parasitemia or parasites in the blood? And even though they're not showing up at the hospital with a severe illness, what are the impacts of that to their development and their health?
Yes, without medical treatment, it's difficult to eliminate the parasite. And a person who's been infected repeatedly, and this is many people, they develop a partial immune tolerance where they have fought off the parasite to keep it at very low levels, but it's not totally gone.
Yeah.
And these individuals can live in malaria endemic areas and not come down with acute severe malaria. They have an immunity. We know this immunity is temporary because when individuals from such a region as that should relocate to Europe or the United States, working as a laborer or a taxi driver, when they return to the endemic country, St. Croix, they will develop malaria again in a very severe form. So it's a balance that we seem to have amongst the people who've had it repeatedly. But it never leaves the person totally well. If they don't have clinical malaria, but they have parasitemia, we know from studies that they're anemic, maybe not severely anemic, but they're somewhat anemic, and they have less exercise tolerance and less mental acuity, and so there's a handicap. And it's not like this is only one child in a village, it might be many or half the children.
Yeah. So you were talking about losing immunity. As a child growing up in St. Croix, I had malaria repeatedly. And then I got treated a lot of times. If I had a fever, my mom gave me anti-malarials without necessarily getting the diagnosis, but probably according to her, I had it like 30 times or something. But then when I went back in 2014 to help bury my father, who wanted to be buried in Wembanyama, which a village in St. Croix, I contracted malaria and winded up in the intensive care unit in Kinshasa, and with a blood pressure of 60/30 at one point.
Oh my
and
goodness.
was in and out of consciousness. So unfortunately, I was lackadaisical about protecting myself, because I thought, well, I have some immunity to it, but didn't work out very well for me. But I did live, so that's good. So what would you say are like the top 3 or 5 or whatever you're inspired to list? What are the top interventions that we have for malaria? What can we do right now with no future research?
Sure. Well, the present understanding of malaria should allow us to take care of most malaria and eliminate it. We've got modern medicines, the artemisinin being the most potent, and most recently employed, which is basically a miracle drug.
Yeah.
Resistance to the artemisinin is appearing. Preventing the individual from ever getting the disease is the best way to take care of this. If we could control the mosquitoes, but controlling the mosquitoes on a small island is feasible. Containing mosquitoes in Africa, where there are trillions of mosquitoes, and trackless expanse it's impossible. The scale is too great. Individuals traveling to the malaria endemic countries could take medicines like blocking the name.
What are you trying to describe?
The medicine I take when I go to the
Doxycycline or Malarone or
Malarone.
Malarone.
Take Malarone.
Yeah.
And sleep under a bed net, an insecticide treated bed net, wear long sleeves and not venture out after dark, you can dramatically reduce the chances of getting malaria, but still some will be infected.
Mhm.
So it's important when an individual who's been to an area with malaria, if he should or she should develop a febrile illness, that they inform the local physicians. Emergency room doctors may not think of malaria in the United States, but hundreds of individuals each year return from the malaria infected areas and develop it.
Yeah, so, yeah, I've seen that too. So if you have a fever in St. Carew, you have any resources at all, you will wind up being treated for malaria, even if the test is negative, probably. But the danger is when you get back to the States and
Yes,
your private pediatrician or the ED doc someplace, they are very hesitant to prescribe the drugs because they're unfamiliar with them. They have side effects, and there's been, several people that I know that passed on because they did not get treated quick enough here in the States. Whereas I know, very few people, missionaries that have passed on actually in Africa.
yes, every day they're taking measures to protect themselves and their whole family, the children. But all malaria isn't transmitted at night while individuals sleeping. There are mosquitoes that will bite people in the daytime, and maybe they won't be out in the hot sunshine, but they may be in the shaded areas. So taking care of the nighttime infections is a big help, but it's not going to be enough everywhere.
Okay. So for controlling the mosquitoes, we have what? We have insecticide impregnated bed nets. We have indoor residual spraying of insecticide in people's homes. We have personal protective clothing and so forth, and some insect repellent. Am I missing anything for controlling the?
Oh, and then the Malron is a
So that prevents you. Once the mosquito bites you, it prevents you from getting infected.
Yes.
But it doesn't prevent you from getting bit. And we have the artemisinin and drugs, which are great. If we can get them to people to where they can get treatment for it. Are we missing anything? Any other major interventions that are available and widely used to prevent or control malaria?
Those are the major.
So, so what about, so the Research Institute is the Johns Hopkins Malaria Research Institute. What are the main, so we talked about the tools that we have, and now what are the tools that might be in the pipeline from the research that's going on here at the Malaria Research Institute?
Well, the Johns Hopkins Malaria Research Institute was launched in the year 2001, as I mentioned, by a gift from the Bloomberg Philanthropies and Michael Bloomberg. And faculty were recruited. There were only, I think, 3 individuals at Hopkins working on malaria. With the gift, we were able to develop a program with 20 faculty members, and also field activities in Africa, most notably in Zambia and Zimbabwe, but some work in the Katanga province of Congo as well. The basic research here at Johns Hopkins of several of our investigators is directly working on the mosquitoes themselves. We have one group, Connor McMenamin, whose team is looking for the molecular signals that attract mosquitoes to the human. The female Anopheles mosquitoes will bite humans and take in the blood to form eggs for reproduction. The male Anopheles don't bite us. And the signals that attract mosquitoes to humans are not all understood. There are volatile compounds that people will emit from their skin, and some will attract mosquitoes much more readily than others. We all know family members who never bitten while the
Right,
rest of us are
right.
getting bitten at a pig.
Yeah,
There's a
That's true.
molecular explanation which is being elucidated. Increasing the resistance of the mosquitoes to become infected with malaria by taking the blood meal. The mosquito doesn't benefit from carrying the parasite. It undergoes a reproductive process in the midgut where there's genetic recombination, and so when the mosquito injects a new person, there'll be malaria with several different variations, and the most effective growth will lead to an infection. I'm not sure I'm getting it, the whole question.
Well, just
Oh,
what might we be able to do in Sankaroo
yes.
a few years from now because of the research
Sure.
that's here?
Let me continue just
Okay.
briefly. We have individuals working on infecting mosquitoes with microorganisms in the midgut.
Mhm.
All of us have what's called a microbiome, bacteria in our guts, and they're not identical.
Right,
And it appears that some bacteria will prevent the mosquito from carrying malaria. That could be introduced as a public health measure to prevent the infection. So there are new molecular and genetic approaches to making the mosquitoes resistant. And then we have individuals looking for new drug targets, developing new drugs,
Mhm.
applying
Yeah.
existing drugs which are already approved for human use for another purpose that have a secondary effect in preventing malaria.
okay. So it doesn't have to go through the whole lengthy FDA process in the same
Yes,
way.
that's correct.
That's good.
Now, the malaria research done in our field stations in Zambia, Zimbabwe, and in collaboration with groups in Congo are often tracking the disease, seeing who has it, who's carrying it, what is the drug resistance, and likewise with the local mosquitoes, what are the insecticide resistant patterns. And it turns out that the Anopheles mosquito is a genus with many different species,
Right.
and some of these species are very aggressive and others are not.
Mhm.
So finding out which areas have the most aggressive malaria transmitting mosquitoes, others that don't, a pattern of epidemiology is emerging where we can predict where malaria may appear next.
Right,
And of course, mosquitoes are abundant during the rainy season.
right.
About half the year it's very dry, and there's limited transmission, but it's not zero. There are mosquitoes.
This is where?
This is
I mean, the half of this, you said half of the year it's very dry. I was just wondering what country.
southern
So-
Africa, which would include eastern Congo, Katanga, Zambia, Zimbabwe.
Yeah, so we have a 9 to 10 month rainy season in Sankaroo. We only get
Yes.
a little break.
So Congo is very damp, and there were mosquitoes all year.
Yeah,
And the mosquitoes that transmit malaria in the drier part of the year, it's not dry, it's less rain though. They're different mosquitoes from the ones that transmit it during the rainy season. So they take turns in sharing this dreadful parasite.
yep. So what about for years, there's been a quest for a malaria vaccine. And now we have a couple, right?
Yes,
Can you tell us a little bit about those and what we can expect from them?
yes, it has been a long slog. More than 3 decades of work has focused on developing a vaccine. Vaccines have revolutionized healthcare. We're we experienced infections which were prevalent when we were young. I'm speaking of adults, but because of the vaccinations, the prevalence of the diseases have been reduced. Measles, for example.
Right.
Malaria is a parasite, and parasites are much more complicated than viruses or bacteria.
Yep.
The viral disease polio has 3 serotypes. That is, there are 3 antibody combining different groups. And this can be taken care of by a single vaccine,
Right.
which will make more than 95% of the children immunized, immune and resistant to polio.
Right.
The parasite malaria has about 5,300 genes. It's much bigger repertoire.
Okay. That's a lot.
So viruses will have a handful of genes, maybe 10. So malaria has 5,300 genes, and you and I have about 20,000. And these genes include proteins, which are important in our maintaining our health. Malaria has the capacity to change its shape, its surface coating, to avoid destruction. And it only takes a small number of survivors to reinfect. Theoretically, a single malaria parasite from a mosquito could infect an individual. And so eliminating 90% may be helpful, but it's not going to be helpful enough.
Right.
And the burden of the disease, where the endemicity is so abundant, it'll be much more challenging to reduce the mosquito population.
So yes, it is a very complex organism. It mutates a lot, and it keeps avoiding a lot of the interventions we develop, including vaccine. But there is 1 or 2 vaccines that are being used in Africa, right?
Yes.
And so we talk about vaccine effectiveness with COVID or measles or what have you. So how effective is, in terms of numbers, how effective is the malaria vaccine?
Well, presently there are 2 that are being used clinically in Africa. The one referred to as RTSS, which is just a code name for the immunogen, which is part of a protein on the surface of the sporozoa. That's the stage the malaria parasite has when it's first injected into the bloodstream from a mosquito bite. This is the result of years of molecular biological investigation, and in mice they were able to create immunity. The RTSS in humans is far less effective. About 30 to 50% will have a partial response after immunization and 4 boosts. So this is an intense effort. You have to have the individuals come back every few months for a boost, and at the end of the year, the person has partial immunity. I mean, they'll have fewer cases and fewer deaths, but maybe 30%. That's not enough to protect most people.
Right.
And so based on the partial success with the RTSS, a new vaccine has been designed, and this is workers at Oxford University in England, and they refer to this as the R21, and this appears to be more effective, maybe 75% effective.
How many, that's after how many doses? I forget
I think
the
that's
schedule.
an immunization in 3 boosts.
After 3.
So it's still, the person has to go back to the clinic, and these are not necessarily convenient.
Right.
And So we need to have a better vaccine. Right? More effort must be put into
So-
this.
Yeah, so these are the things that kind of disturb me about working in St. Croix. So last year we had a measles epidemic, and it killed at least 2,000 children, and there were many cases of it. And our immunization rate in the province is somewhere around 20 to 30 for the one dose measles vaccine. So the thought of introducing a vaccine that requires 3 doses and at the end is not nearly as effective as measles is a little daunting logistically for me to even grasp. But
Well, so the current vaccines, when administered to populations, will reduce the morbidity and the mortality. It'll improve things. And those thousands of people who've benefited, it may be all or nothing, but it's not enough to protect most. And I think the consensus is that we improve the immunogen, the vaccine, making it more effective, that the individuals will respond and still have improved outcomes, but it's not by itself going to be enough.
yeah, so yeah, as we work on improving the our vaccine distribution program, there's opportunities to incorporate the malaria vaccine at some point.
There have been many announcements that vaccines have been prepared, and these have all failed when investigated more.
I'm sorry, what?
Rigorously.
Can
There
you
were
repeat that?
investigators over the years who
Right.
announced that they achieved
A
the vaccine, the
yes.
long sought universal vaccine,
Right,
but they've never panned out. It's a complicated problem,
right,
probably one of the most important challenges that we face in terms of humanity.
right. It is. What about so? And I know one of your students is particularly interested in this. So a lot of the so we face a lot of logistical problems in delivering bed nets or the testing cartridges or medicines, and it's not a problem that's entirely unique to St. Croix. Do you have researchers working on how to do operational research or logistical research to help overcome the barriers that we face in the field to implementing some of these interventions we already know work?
This is a very important point, because the technology we have now could be much more effective if the drugs were more carefully managed, and this will require infrastructure. St. Croix has no paved roads, and when it has a heavy rainfall, traffic between villages is difficult. You can't carry many cases of artemisinin and combination medications on a small mini bike. The unfortunate problems of poverty with officials who are underpaid and sometimes not honest compound this. And so having the medicines as we would expect them in the United States is the ideal, but it's oftentimes not achieved. And it's a tragic situation in Congo in particular. It is confirmed that the Democratic Republic of Congo has more than $75 trillion of precious metals. This is where the metals for microelectronics comes from. $75 trillion of precious metals in the soil, and a population of about 75 million people. if you do the calculation, that means $1 million per person. Yet Democratic Republic of Congo has one of the lowest per capita GDPs in the world. So there's inefficiency and dishonesty and the weather. It gets to be a big challenge.
It is a big challenge. So that may, so you're talking about how much money is available in the Congo, made me think of something else. So in the history of malaria in the United States, we had endemic malaria, right? Even in
Yes.
Baltimore. And then there was some efforts to control the mosquito population, and malaria is essentially eliminated, except for imported cases. And what I've heard is that it's not so much the DDT that got rid of the malaria, it was the way that our lifestyles changed. We began to be living more indoors. We're sort of naturally protected from the infectious mosquitoes because of the way we live. Is that accurate?
Yes, I think it is accurate. Amongst the technological breakthroughs, I would include the spring-drawn screen door,
Right.
something that we take for granted if we live in areas that have mosquitoes, that will effectively keep the mosquitoes out of the house. But when the impoverished individuals are constructing homes out of, these impoverished individuals are constructing homes out of very substandard building materials that will not be mosquito tight.
Right. So if we could just build everybody in the Sankaroo a nice home, the screen tight,
Well,
the screen doors, we'd be in good shape, right?
we would be. It was observed that malaria could be considered a disease of poverty if we could
Right.
raise the standard of living to provide good housing, rapid access to the testing and treatment. We would take care of it. In southern Zambia, over the last 20 years, the Hopkins group has documented a dramatic decline in the number of cases of childhood malaria. Macha Hospital was, for years, averaging about 1,500 children admitted to the children's ward each year, with up to 100 deaths. When the artemisinin and combination were introduced over the course of about 3 years, the case rate dropped. And when the insecticide-treated bed nets were introduced, they dropped further, and so the number of cases declined by 95%. And the number of deaths have gone to zero.
Wow.
No deaths
That's amazing.
in the last 7 years.
So there's hope.
There is hope.
Good. Yeah, so we have 3 malaria researchers who are moving some of their research from Malawi and Zambia to Loja, because we have so much malaria and they're
Yes.
beginning to have trouble conducting their research, or don't have enough cases of the right kind anyway. So
Yes.
they're following us to Sankaroo. So I should say, we're open for business. Anybody looking for high transmission rates and high death rates of malaria, we're certainly we're open for business. As the head of medical research for the province, we are definitely interested in partners.
Well, I don't mean to be pessimistic, but I hear a lot of celebration that we're eliminating malaria rapidly. The countries that had small malaria burdens are now malaria free, but the places where it's been difficult, it's many places it's getting worse. And global climate change is leading to still other perturbations of the problem, because of mosquitoes living at higher altitudes.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. What else we need to talk about? Greg, do you want to chime in?
Well, Paul, maybe you should talk a little more about the situation in St. Kuru and what might be helpful for people to do who want to make an impact.
So, yeah, so I work in St. Kuru within the government provincial health headquarters. And I am charged with the responsibility of seeking partners who can help us financially or partner with us in writing grants. And malaria has to be our top priority. And so you can go to my website at stkaru.org and contribute. And you want me to do another take on that? I have trouble asking for money.
Doctor, I'm making him ask for money, because otherwise he's too modest and shy to do that.
I share the problem though.
Yeah, do another take, go ahead.
Do another take. So
And if you'd like to chime in, Doctor, feel free.
maybe. So yeah, so I work at the provincial headquarters in the Senkuru province. And so I'm looking for contributions to help my work there. We not only are, so I'm working at the provincial headquarters, sort of dealing with the health of the entire Senkuru. And that gets into like numbers and graphs and planning programs and that sort of thing. But I also started a project called the First Hope Fund, where we pay for hospitalizations for children who almost always have malaria to try to save their lives. And these are for poor people who would, and most of their kids would die. And it only costs about $150 to pay for hospitalization, including blood transfusions, the IV medication, the IVs, everything that goes into it. There's not a, without electricity, without modern technology, without the ability to do respiration for kids and other more complicated things. But we can do a lot with $150 to pay for hospitalization. So, and most of the kids do very well and go home. And so, is that okay?
That's fine with me.
Terrible. I'm terrible.
Doctor, is there anything that we're missing? Is there anything that people should know or that would be helpful for us to add for people who might be interested in supporting Paul's work or just fighting
Sure.
the disease in general?
Well, I'd like to reiterate the notion that resources make a difference.
Okay.
It's been said that a budget is a moral statement.
It is. It is.
Well, but budget is cut. There will be human consequences. So while donors may not give huge sums of money, it will make a difference for someone. And philanthropy has become a source of tremendous good things. The tech billionaires are oftentimes described under unattractive descriptions, but the fact is that several of these individuals have bought into the notion that this is an investment in the future of our species. I think the ability to rescue children, keep them from getting ill on the other side of the earth is unconnected to us is not true. The microelectronics in your automobile came from Congo. We're dependent on. And I think having spent some time, not anywhere near as much as you have, Paul, but some time in Congo and other developing countries in Africa, we realize that the children may not have electronic toys, but if they have their health and parents to support them, they can get education, and it'll be a different life, but it can be a rewarding life. And some of these children who do well in school will have opportunities. The leadership in the African countries is emerging. This is not simply charity, it's an investment in their future and our future.
Amen. I said that really well.
He's had a little more practice.
I
than you,
think,
Paul.
well, I don't know if that was practice or not. That sounded straight from the heart to me.
Exactly.
And I really appreciate that
Thank you.
sentiment. And that's better than I could probably ever say it, but I really appreciate that.
So you're doing something that's very important. Somehow, we're not given the privilege of deciding what was our most important contribution. This comes from outside. And there are very few people that can look in the mirror and sense the love that you have in your heart for what they do. And as a medical doctor, I suppose the impression that I was going to save lives. I don't think I've saved any lives. We've generated some scientific advances that may help others save lives, but in a place like Suncrew, it's such a challenge that it's going to take a long time and a lot of resources, but it's part of our humanity that we need to attend to.
I agree. I firmly agree. I had a serendipitous or career in autism, and I had a son with autism, and I went into it because I quickly sized up the field of autism. This is back in 1996, and realized that research was the best intervention because virtually nothing was known about autism. And the research infrastructure, the type of research that was done was very, very poor and very small scale. And so research, one comment is that sometimes research is the best intervention and it saves lives. And with autism, I was just trying to, people kept pulling me into it. I was just trying to get out of it as quickly as I can. And I think I was very persuading and was able to convince really powerful people to invest in what was a vision that I felt God gave me. And people like the head of Home Depot, head of NBC radio, not radio, but head of NBC, the head of the NIMH, Hollywood movie stars who were working at Cure Autism now. And today, the field is very different. Everybody works collaboratively, large scale projects, genetic databases, all interconnected. And the landscape of autism research is entirely transformed. And I had the opportunity to convince people to do that. And as I go back to the St. Room, start to work on the problems there, it's really nice to be a friend with a Nobel laureate who has such a big heart. And I know that God will direct you to connect me with people, and I will do my best to plug them in the St. Group because I'm not out there to do, if I try to do things on my own, it's not going to work, right? So it's going to take a lot of people working together with a common vision for malaria, for St. Carew. And
You have that gift.
I don't think I talk so good, but somehow I could, people respond to my heart, I guess. I don't know. But
Well, when you're speaking the truth from the heart, it's not a sales pitch. It's like the budget is a moral statement. I don't recall attending any events where accountants would get up and warm the audience with the discussions of the pay line. But in fact, the resources are essential to your work.
yeah. Well, yes. And one, I think I may have shared this with you before, but I felt convicted that I grew up in a corrupt country. So since the days of Mobutu within the St. Carew, corruption is a form of government. It's been called a kleptocracy, meaning that, to be truthful, a few years ago, I prided myself in how to interact with policemen and immigration people. But in the end, I participated in corruption by paying some money here and there to get through immigrations and that sort of thing. And I've been convicted not to do that anymore. And I don't. And I've been really surprised how people respond to it. And I can't get into too many stories, but yeah, I think people are tired of it. They know that the system is corrupt. They know that what they are doing, good people that I work with are really tired of the corruption and the system that doesn't work, a system that forces people into honestly lying and pretty much forces them into benefiting from the stock that's in their health center or whatever, because they're not being paid by the government. And I hope that a new day is dawning over the St. Carew, because resources alone won't fix the problem. People's hearts have to change. We have to be willing to be men and women of integrity. And that's wherein lies, I think, a lot of our hope. And I feel like I'm seeing a little bit of change in that direction.
Well, it's such a huge task to make some progress. All we can expect. But the concerted efforts of other individuals and future generations of individuals can change the course of history. Congo in particular has suffered for more than a century now. And with independence came a brief glimmer of hope, but the corruption of the individuals at that time, including the donor nations, made things worse.
Yep. Yeah. That is true. I think we all, and some of that corruption is, we've gotten used to it. And I think most donor organizations or health organizations working in the Congo, I think they want to do the right thing. They're interested in improving the health of people. But I think that collectively the government and the donor community have gotten into some very bad habits that are destructive. One more question. I'm going to ask you a question that will definitely not be on it unless you want it to be. But so
Let me try this one. Wait,
you're looking to say hello again?
yeah, at the end.
You want to try that again?
Why don't you finish?
Okay, so this is my question, and this is just a question that I really wanted to ask you. not really part of so much this interview, but so faith is big in terms of what I feel what I'm doing in the Congo, and feel that God is a part of it. And quite frankly, if he wasn't, I don't know that I would have hope. One of my favorite pastimes over the past 6 months has been binging on the debate between theists and atheists, looking at the science and interpreting it, and so talking about things like fine tuning of the universe, all the constants happen to be so perfect, consciousness, which is a little hard to explain, and where the first cell came from, which probably someday will become explained. But I was just wondering where you were on that debate. Do you think science is leading us to, needing to invoke something like a God for its creation? Or do you think science will ultimately explain everything, including how something came of nothing?
Well, science certainly can enlighten us, but it doesn't necessarily take care of everything, and there's always a deeper level. The black holes in space, it's impossible for me to fathom that there are vacuums out in space where entire galaxies can disappear, and the gravitational attraction is so strong that even light can't emerge. Is this related to God's universe? Is God all of the matter that we see? I think we're very limited. We can see that earlier humans in human history believed things which we now don't believe, but we're no more intelligent. We just have a larger database. And of course, the people who choose not to learn things, they have no advantage. I think science will continue to identify new levels of understanding, and some of this will be translated to help us. 1949, the year I was born, sickle cell hemoglobin was discovered.
Right.
But here in 2024, we still don't have a good treatment that's affordable to prevent people from having sickle crises. So I think that the magnitude of the question is so far beyond us that I wouldn't criticize a scientist for refusing to believe there's a God, but I wouldn't necessarily assume that all scientists are atheists.
Oh, no, not at all. I mean, most of these debates were between Christians who are scientists and scientists who are not, who are atheists. So, but yeah,
I
so
think both groups can do good things.
absolutely.
Jonas Salk was not a Christian.
Yeah.
Is he lesser effective?
No, not at all. I mean, one of my favorite characters is actually Richard Dawkins, and he's an atheist. I watch probably more videos of him than anybody else. And I appreciate his.
I met him, and
You did?
it was an interesting event because he was on a panel discussion with Ben Carson,
Uh-huh.
the Hopkins neurosurgeon, who's a born-again Christian.
Right.
And Dawkins is very clever, but he's also
He
very
is.
sarcastic.
Yeah.
And the audience was a very distinguished group of people who were all the American Rhodes Scholars, Marshall Scholars, White House Fellows, and then older scientists or people in business, entertainment industry, government. And the discussion was very fascinating because Ben Carson really captured everybody's sympathy, and Dawkins was ridiculing it. And so if this was a debate, Carson won. He's now considered less saintly because he was a housing secretary for Donald Trump,
right.
but Dawkins can do good things, or has.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
There was only one person at the
I
end.
like the guy a lot, actually. He's now there's some other like Christopher Hitchens, bless his heart, he's passed away. He's a little more aggressive.
Yeah.
But Dawkins, there's something that I really like about him.
So he got a standing ovation by one person in the audience. That was his wife.
All right.
Academy of Achievement.
So, you know, this came up a couple of days ago. Who was I talking to? But you know, we tried to, you came to the Congo Protestant University and you spoke, and in this cathedral, right? And
Yeah.
it was packed.
They were
Huge
very,
audience.
very responsive.
Yes, and you're saying the periodic table and things like that. But the student union, you know, after your visit, they pushed me to get Ben Carson there. So maybe I
Ben-
should reach out to him and see if he's ready to go.
Well, I would do that.
Okay,
Ben was the
I'll
most
tell him that you told me
recognized.
to do it.
I'll probably have his phone number. We can call him in the office.
Okay,
Send him a text.
cool.
Ben and Candy are good friends. They live in Florida now. He believes what he says.
Yeah.
But he was the most beloved American in the bookstores, and all the airports in Africa were filled with Ben Carson's books. I'm ashamed I've never read any. I should read one or two. His story is unique,
Yeah,
but even Ben Carson doesn't have perfect vision.
yeah. No. I've watched the movie. I've not read any of his books. Because I told you I don't like to read, but but yeah, the movie Gifted Hands was a very nice story. And I worked with him as a pediatric resident. He was always very nice, and every time I've contacted him, I don't know if he still has the same emails back in 2015, but he's always been responsive
So you've interacted with him.
via email. Well, on the wards back in 97 through 2000.
Sure.
And then when I think you put us in contact in the
That sounds
2014
familiar.
or so.
I think we did. It was harder to find when he left Hopkins.
Yeah.
There was a constant stream of medical students knocking on his door to meet him.
Right.
And he, as far as I know, never responded roughly.
Very patient, loving man. I think you got me invited. Yeah, you got me invited to the celebration of Carson Scholars.
Oh, yeah.
I had to sit at the kid table. You sat at the table. You sat with, I believe, Ben Carson.
Oh, this was at Martin's West.
Martin's West.
I remember it.
I was in the table next to you guys.
Wynton Marsalis sat at our table.
Yeah.
He was a fan of Ben Carson.
And my father's favorite trumpeter, right? Right? Winston
Wynton
Marsalis. He
Marsalis.
played the trumpet.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Is there anything else?
No, I think you guys have done a great job. We burned up a perfectly good hour of your time. First, thank you.
Oh my goodness, it's already 3.
The most valuable hour I've had, certainly for several days, maybe this month.
Well,
Thank you.
I'm not a seasoned interviewer, so I apologize.
I think you did a great job. I think you both did a fabulous job.
All right.
Thank you.
Well, I'm sure it was all truthful.
Yeah, I don't think I told too many lies anyway. That I really appreciate your heart.
So when do you anticipate returning to?
On the 18th of March, I fly out.
So do you need a different license in Africa?
I do, yeah, and so then you have to do a tropical medicine certificate
Mhm.
and then take the test before you can be licensed. So I'm not licensed, and a lot of international doctors come and they practice, but it's technically against the rules. Since I'm at the provincial headquarters, things are a little bit formal around me. And so I follow the rules in regards to practicing medicine. But I can go pay for hospitalizations and things like
Yeah, the
that.
problem with the kleptocracy is pervasive. Mobutu was put in place by the United States government.
Yeah.
John
The
F.
Belgians.
Kennedy congratulated him for taking care of the communist problem in Congo.
Yeah. Well, Lumumba, as you know, is from Sankuru. He was the
I'm reading
initial
a
prime minister.
biography of him right now.
Really?
It's a masterful book.
There's a
Get it on a Kindle because it's a big fat book.
yeah. So if you go over to the Wembanyama Chumbi area, there's a collection of there's a area, which is a collection of villages that is called Lumumbaville.
Yeah.
And so, we're doing there's not much of a ville there. There's no,
Well, he was immortalized by dying young. He was a martyr. He was probably not that competent.
no, he wasn't well educated. And I think his personality lended itself well to being a rebel leader, but not a statesman, because he made a lot of mistakes in his relationships with the West in particular. He's pretty hot-headed.
Well, it was a pretty rough community. Moise Shambe and Katanga,
Mhm,
Joseph Kasavubu and Joseph Mobutu.
mhm. Difficult
I was
times.
in sixth grade when all that happened. I remember my teacher, Mr. Hughes, commenting on the names Lumumba, Kasavubu.
Yeah. My granddad passed. He was shot by rebel soldiers in 1964, 4 years after independence.
Your grandfather,
Mhm.
did he survive?
He died in the hospital that he built and is buried next to that hospital.
In Sankuru?
Yeah, and my dad was buried next to him when he died of prostate cancer. He worked there for over 40 years.
Albert Schweitzer buried outside his hospital.
Yeah. Good man. He played the piano really well.
Oregon,
Was it Oregon?
yeah,
Okay.
he had a pipe organ in Lamourade. I'm sure the mice and moths have disintegrated it, but there was a celebration for the 100th anniversary of the opening of the Lamourade Hospital. This was about 10 or 12 years ago, and I was invited. The Swedish demographer, Hans Rosling,
Mhm.
he was in the group. It was very interesting. He asked the staff questions. And one of them he asked is, how big is the catchment area for this hospital? Because they know how many cases of malaria they had and all. He asked 3 different staff members who got wildly different answers. So his conclusion was they don't know.
Yeah.
what the incidence is. But
Yeah.
He was very clear that it's not just the economy, it's the level of corruption that makes a difference.
Yep. Very true.
Well, let's stay in touch.
Will do.
I'd like to come back to Africa. I don't have anything important to do there, but I hoping Bill will see something.
Yeah.
The
well,
funding, you
We
know.
have hopefully one of your students coming out.
Who was that?
Work there. Ann Martin. She
Oh, Annie Martin, she is terrific.
Yeah.
She's very impressive. She's very organized. Fearless. The budget dilemma that Congress is facing with the shutdown, I think, is causing the delay. They have not announced that funds will be released. So Bill waiting eagerly. The funding score was fundamental. Release of funds.
This is for the renewal of the, what's it called?
The International Center of Excellence
Yeah.
in Malaria Research, ICMR.
Nice.
Yes, it was one for Southern Central Africa. We don't have active programs now in Katanga because of the budget shortfall.
Mhm.
But Matt Ippolito has studied Congolese refugees. Well, so thank you. so
Thank
much.
you.
This interesting experience. Oh, I didn't say that.
You did really well the first time.
Okay.
Do you want to get it again?
Do what? Oh, do you want to try, you want to try to tell it one more time? Okay. that's
Where
fine.
did it go? Here it is. So it's Moyole Antuche Lusankuru.
Moyole Usante
Le Antu. Moyole Antuche Lusankuru.
Moyole Utache Lusankuru.
You did it better the first time. Moyole Antu. Che Lusankuru.
Moyole Antu Che Lu Sankuru.
That's
Perfect.
Thank you.
So you're effectively in
I am the,
health.
yes, I teach marketing and here. And in fact, I always joke that I tell my students, look, there are 1800 courses in the School of Public Health. How many courses have marketing in the title?
Probably one. You're
One, mine.
I would never guess that.
Yes, that's it.
So that must be a good course.
Well, it's a fun course. I've taught it 2 or 3 times a year for the last decade. here.
Well,
So-
the truth is, if you can't sell the idea, why would anyone want to work on it?
Thank you very much. Could you say that once more on tape?
Yeah, I'm gonna charge you a fee.
Well, that's okay. And let's just try that one more time, doctor, just for the sake of my students.
Marketing is important. If you can't sell the idea, no one will work on it.
Thank you.
That's good.
That's perfect.
Are you gonna send a note to Ben for me?
Yeah, I'm not contacted him recently, but I'm wondering if we're gonna have there's a group in Washington that a couple. Catherine and Wayne Reynolds. And they have these get-togethers called the Academy of Chief Police invited. I don't think they had. COVID. They had one. And that was in Washington about a year ago. And they bring in people from different areas, and it's amazing, people that show up. Ben is often a feature speaker. His wife Candy is delightful. We've gotten to know them pretty well.
Say hello to your wife for me. Please, thank you, doctor. It's been a pleasure.
Clean up our mess.
Yeah, please.
Anything I can do to help you?
No, we're fine. I just have to strike the tent.
If you're not gonna use the water, I'll give those back to Trish.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
That was yours
anyway. I just refill it.
Uh,
I figure the chemicals that are still in this bottle after using it 500 times. They're gone. I'm 75. I don't think I have to worry about it.
Be careful, so am I, doctor.
So in fact, the bad and good is Still here.
Yeah, right, exactly. You're not the only one born in 1949 in this room.
Most of my friends school together. They all had arthritis. Banging prostate.
Guilty as charged.
Some of us have grandchildren. That's what it's for.
Yeah, guilty as charged there too. That's the reward.
Thank you again.
Thank you. Bye-bye. What a nice guy. What's the best love?
Yeah. He did the best appeal for money that will ever happen in any of my podcasts.
He was terrific. Mhm. No, he was terrific. So, yeah, we've got it all in the can here.
Start unwiring things.
I'm gonna